Hi, welcome back. While trying to think of video ideas to make, I was looking through old character kits and comparing them to new ones. I also watched Waveman's video uploaded yesterday, which was talking about what it was like to play StarRail when the game first came out. The biggest thing I noticed was how much StarRail deviated from what seemed to be their original plan for the game, and how much they will continue to deviate from it with newer characters. Some of their newer character design choices are very questionable, and others just don't make sense. A while ago before 3.0 came out, I made a couple videos talking about how Remembrance has an identity crisis, and why it doesn't make sense to be a whole new path. And a while after that, my friend Fleur made a video talking about bloated character kits. These two topics are honestly two pretty big problems that exist in Star Rail, so let's talk about how this game continues to break its own rules when making new characters, and how this affects the balance and state of the game very negatively. Before we start, you should like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and join the Express Run Discord server, where you can find some lovely people to chat with about video games and anime, or any other topic really. Also, just as a warning, we're going to be talking about Annex's kit very briefly, but it's definitely a huge subject of today's video. If you don't want to know anything about it, just skip the section where I do talk about it. Now, let's get on to it. So when the game first came out, there was a straightforward path and element system, with each path having its own playstyle and each character having an element or type that they'd have to match with the enemy so they could defeat that enemy in a reasonable amount of time. If you took Cielo without Silverwolf and tried going up against Japard, you wouldn't have a very good time. Silverwolf was a character that could completely remove the need for the element mechanic since she could just implant elements, as we all know, and while she is considered to be very bad these days, she was definitely quite broken when she came out because we had a barely fleshed out roster with barely enough DPS units to fill all the types that existed in the game. So you could just use her with any units and you didn't have to worry about anything other than RNG applying the correct elements. I think Silverwolf was a pretty good kit design at the time, honestly, especially since she has the huge weakness of being only single target and having barely any more defense threat than a 4-star unit, so it was fine overall. When Jingliu and Dan Honkai came out, she was still one of the best options because they still had to worry about matching their types to the enemies. However, things took a pretty significant turn when Acheron and Firefly came out. Firefly is able to implant weaknesses onto enemies to be able to break them, and Acheron is not only able to reduce any weakness type, but also ignores 20% resistance of all types with her ultimate, meaning her main source of damage doesn't even care about enemy weaknesses and resistances. And while Silverwolf is a pretty good support unit for her, she's still only single target. She also strays quite heavily from the path system, being an Nihility character that is really an additional destruction DPS unit. By releasing all these units that could ignore more than half of the strategy that the game was based on, not only does it completely negate the need for strategy or thinking, because how dare a strategy game require brain power, right? But it also paves the way for a load of power creep to rear its ugly head at an exponential rate, just like what has been happening with Star Rail. Now, Firefly wouldn't have been nearly as broken as she is if she couldn't implant a fire weakness, and I think that would have been very balanced. But the devs don't really care about balanced, they care about making money. While giving an implant or weakness ignore mechanic to a super break unit like Firefly seems smart, in the end it turns out to be pretty stupid. In my opinion, and you would probably find this to be an incredibly hot take, but when a game has a weakness system, it should stick to that weakness system and not have units that completely fuck it over. You wouldn't play rock, paper, scissors with an extra option like a bomb that just destroys all of rock, paper, or scissors, just because it's very unbalanced. Having a unit like Acheron, Firefly, Rappa, and Boothill, and even Fugue that ignore weaknesses to the insane extent that they do, unlike Silverwolf who has that ability but with severe weaknesses like RNG, is a dandy way to fuck your game up. I mentioned Fleur's Bloated Kits video, which, as I've said before, is absolute cinema, and I think that adding the weakness ignore mechanics that all these units have is one such example of a heavily bloated kit, which is only there to make the unit unreasonably strong so that you are more incentivized to pull for them. There is genuinely no reason in lore or gameplay quality of life for Fei Xiao to ignore weaknesses with her ultimate. You could argue a case for Acheron because she's Nihility, but there is and should be a pretty obvious line between kit design and lore reasons. Just because Acheron is Nihility Emanator doesn't mean she has to just not care about what the enemies are. If she didn't have that ability to ignore weaknesses and the 20% resistance ignore, she wouldn't have been so much stronger than the previous best DPS Jingliu, and would have been perfectly balanced in my opinion. And they wouldn't have to scale their next characters as multipliers so high and also give her weakness ignore as well with her ultimate. Now, I've also mentioned my Remembrance Identity Crisis video, which is going to come into play when discussing a future character in a bit, but for right now, Remembrance is a very badly designed path in my opinion. We have 2 Remembrance DPS units, a Remembrance Harmony unit, and then we're also getting 2 Remembrance healers in the future, one a 4-star and the other a 5-star. While this sounds fine when you first think about it, and not a very huge issue, you gotta remember that Lycones are tied to specific paths. The reason why they'd put Acheron in the Nihility path instead of Erudition or Destruction is because barely any Nihility Lycones actually work on her and you'd have to pull her signature. There's only 2, while you would have been able to use almost any Erudition Lycone on her, which increases her ultimate damage like Make the World Clamor or Jingyuan's signature. Now they're obviously not going to be as good as her signature, especially because of the extra stack on skill, but they still would have been fairly decent options. Options that you don't have since she's Nihility. When you get the Remembrance Healer units, you're not going to be able to use any Abundance Lycones on them, so no Quid Pro Quo or Luocha's signature. Now they're obviously going to have their own signature Lycone, but that's the whole point. They're either going to get a Gacha 4-star Lycone or signature, and a small chance of getting an event Lycone. They're really banking on you having to pull the Lycone as well as the character. If they instead had some sort of sub-path system, where members Trailblazer for example counted as a Remembrance and Harmony unit, because that's what their kit is, so they could use Harmony Lycones as well, while Castoris and Glea would count as Destruction or Erudition DPS units, so that they could use Destruction or Erudition Lycones. But hey, it wouldn't have made them enough money because they couldn't sell more Lycones or market a whole new path. While you may think that the recent characters coming out like Aglaia and Herda are perfectly balanced besides their insane multipliers, you would be right. I think Aglaia and Herda have very well designed kits, apart from Aglaia being Remembrance, which is, as we discussed, is a whole issue on its own. My Day is also going to be perfectly balanced besides his multipliers, and while Tribi does break some Harmony rules by dealing so much damage, Robinori does something like that so to make a competitive support they'd have to counteract that in some way. These 3.0 and 3.1 characters do seem pretty well designed and all, but Anaxa is coming out in 3.2 alongside Castoris. He's most likely going to be Herda's best support, being an Erudition sub-DPS unit, but the really lovely thing about him that is just such a great design choice by the developers is that he is able to implant random weaknesses that stack. The more weaknesses the enemy has, the more damage he's going to do. That's the basic gist of his kit. First of all, we finally have direct Silverwolf power creep. Not only can he implant weaknesses with any attack he does, be it basic, skill, or ultimate, but if you have enough effect hit rate and hit the enemy enough times, you can literally just apply all 7 elements on the enemy. That sounds really fun and balanced, doesn't it? I mean, of course it's very broken, because it dismisses one of the fundamentals of combat in Honkai Star Rail. The element system was basically the only thing we had in Star Rail that gave you any semblance of strategy, and the weakness Silverwolf had, like being single target and only applying one weakness at a time randomly, also made you think about either using her or someone else. Someone like Anaxa completely throws that out of the window, which is incredibly disappointing. Using Silverwolf is just going to be very stupid when Anaxa comes out. Not only is Anaxa also like a Nihility Erudition unit because he applies weaknesses, but also when he comes out he's going to make Herda absolutely broken in every single game mode, even more than she is, because he's going to apply ice weakness on every single enemy, which is kind of insane. Breaking the rules like this definitely made HSR a lot worse than it is, and it's basically what threw balance out of the window and paved way for this amount of power creep that the game is stuck with right now. If they stuck with their rules, it would have been still incredibly fun and balanced, and the only way power creep would have happened is through raw multipliers. Acheron wouldn't have been so much stronger than Jingliu if she didn't ignore 20% alt-type resistance with her ult, as I said earlier, and Firefly wouldn't have been so broken if she couldn't implant a weakness. While she would have been absolute dog against non-fire weak enemies, then that's the point, and guess what? You could have just used Silverwolf with her anyway and fixed that issue, and when Fugue came out she would have been actually really great and wouldn't have been doom posted as much as she was. Because while she does allow you to ignore weaknesses, she does it at only 50% capacity, which is, in my opinion, pretty balanced. She still would have been 50% less effective against non-fire weak enemies, which is good. Acheron didn't have to ignore weaknesses, and Silverwolf would have been so much better with her too. Now, it may sound like I'm just trying to make Silverwolf a better character, but that's half the point of this video. She's a character that could break some of the elemental type rules of the game, but she did it in a balanced way because she's single target and limited by only one RNG implanted weakness, so it required thinking, while someone like Anaxa is multi-target and can implant as many weaknesses as he likes. Not only does he break the path system, but also breaks the elemental type system. In my opinion, a fire type character should only be the best against fire weak enemies, and shouldn't be better against ice weak enemies than an ice type character. Right now, Firefly or even Linksha Super Break clears the second half bug boss at MOC 12 3 times faster than most Jingliu or Dan Honkai L teams and probably at an even lower cost. When you break the rules of the game this badly, it becomes really ridiculous. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if the next Hun character was also somehow AoE through a kit loophole, and the next DOT character was actually Remembrance instead of Nihility. So that's basically it. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and join the Express Discord server for a lovely community to hang out with. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. That's basically all I have for you today. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time.